I hope that you have enjoyed your lunch break. So let's do a quick recap from Gary, where Gary left. Basically, he has completed the design phase, where he basically covered the fit to standard workshop. He also customized a particular process that's going to be part of this implementation, and he has created the requirement that was required during that phase. So if I go quickly from the implementation side and go to requirements. Perfect. So yeah, from the implementation side, what I'm going to show you is quickly the requirement. Here we go, the requirements. So the next activity that I'm going to do before fully moving to the build phase is just that this requirement needs to go through the approval process. This is where the business expert is going to have the conversation with the functional consultant. They explain, okay, this is what I need to be delivered. We know that from this particular requirement, we go automation for project requisition to be approved. After having that conversation with the functional consultant, there is an agreement, okay, this is something that we're going to deliver for the business. So now this is going to be fully approved. And at this point, I'm going to wear my hat as the functional consultant. Obviously, the requirement belongs to the business. So what I'm going to do right now is just to create a user story. So the user story is basically breaking down my requirement, is basically providing what the user needs in order to give value to the business. And on top of that, I'm going to use my user story to keep a track of the requirement so I don't lose that visibility. So from the requirement itself, you can see the create button. And you go and click on user story. And at this point, I'm going to provide a title or description. Manager. Okay. And now I'm going to click on save and close. So you will see that this is going to take me back to the requirement, and you will see that now under the requirement itself, I have the user story created. It could be the case that if you're doing a RISE implementation, you can create multiple user stories, just one for enhancement, one for to work on a form, one to create on a particular report. So yeah, the user story is to give that visibility to the functional consultant at what needs to be deployed. And something I need to do is just also set the status as a functional consultant to this user story to in progress. And now by going back to my requirement, the next activity as a functional consultant, I know that for this particular activity, I need a transport. So I'm going to create a feature. The feature is going to basically not only allow you to create transport, but it's also going to keep a record of all the changes that you do on the particular landscape that you're working on. In this case, it's going to be an S4 landscape. So the feature is going to track every single change that you do there. I can save, and I can also on top of that assign the user story. So I keep that link between all the activities that I'm doing as a functional consultant. And I click on save and close. And this is going to take me back to the requirements. So from here, you can see now I have a link between the three transactions that I've created, the requirement coming from the business, user story for the user, for the functional consultant, and the feature that is going to allow me just to keep a track of all the landscape changes. The next activity, I'm going to create the transport. I'm going to click on start implementation. Make sure that this is fully accepted. And when this is done, you're going to be in a position to create a transport. So under the feature itself, you can see the create button. You can click on transport, and you will see that right now I have the option to create a transport. I can assign the developer. And if you don't know what kind of transport you need, you can leave both checkboxes available. But for now, because I already complete my development activities in the development system, I'm gonna link a transport that is currently available. So this is gonna basically connect with your development system. It's gonna show you all the transports that are available in your development system process. So I go one that is gonna be assigned, and I click on assign. So you can see right now all the information about my transport request, and I'm gonna basically click on save and close. So I make sure that all this information is safe. Oh, for some reason, this one has a big, yeah. Okay, so right now with the transport available, as a developer or as a functional consultant, basically completing my activities, I say, you know what, I'm happy for this transport to be released. So I'm gonna click on the release button. And what this is gonna do is gonna create a job. And the job is gonna allow SAP Cloud ALM to communicate with my development system, and it's gonna show that that transport is gonna be released. It's gonna take a couple of minutes. So something that I would like to show you while we wait for this transport to be released, it's just keeping a track about the current activities that we have done so far. So we know that we are currently during the build phase. And here you can see that you have access to a project overview. This is dashboard in real time. If I compare this with the SAP Solution Manager, you also have really good dashboards for any implementation that you're working on, but that requires additional configuration in terms of the projects that I'm working on, in terms of making sure that you schedule the data extraction on a specific frequency. Whereas in SAP Cloud ALM, this is available automatically. I didn't have to do anything else apart from showing you the dashboard. On top of that, we can just show you about the analytics. In this case, if I want to show you about the feature traceability, we can just check about how many specific features have been created for my process. And we can see that right now you have information about the deployment status. So this gives you information about the status of the transport. So if I jump back into the system, we can see that the transport has been released from my development system. So the final activity before concluding the build phase is going to be for me just to deploy my transport into the QA system. So I come here to the feature, click on deploy, and this is now going to allow me to import this transport into the QA system. Again, it's going to create a job. It's going to make sure that this is deployed to the QA environment. But by the time that this is completed, I'm going to set the status to hand over to test. So right now, we're going to start moving to the test phase where my colleague Jack O'Brien is going to cover this one. But my final activity is going to also to keep a track of the requirement. And I'm going to also set this particular requirement to in testing. The reason being is that if we're covering not only functional integration for the whole functional, the functional consultant team, I also make sure that we are covering user acceptance testing. So the business is also part of the testing. And when that's done, they're going to basically approve. So this is more kind of agile implementation. So with this done, I'm going to now invite my colleague, Jack O'Brien, who's going to proceed with the testing phase.
Cheers, Jose. Right, time for everyone's favourite topic, testing. So before we jump into the system, I just want to kind of set some expectations for test management in Cloud ALM. So anyone who's used Solution Manager before will know that there was a lot of functionality for test management in Solution Manager. It was quite complex, rightfully so for the sort of projects that were being delivered. But I believe in Cloud ALM, a lot of that unnecessary complexity is actually being removed in Cloud ALM. It's a lot easier, as Jose's just shown, to create a feature request. You're moving a transport through, and it's not essentially an ordeal to create a test case and just to do some testing. You can still have complex testing, which is what I'll go into, and you can still have multiple test cases, different testers, test sequence, etc., which are coming down the line. But just picking it up off the bat, it isn't too complicated, which is hopefully what I'm going to show you today. So starting off at a very top level as kind of a test manager, the first thing I want to show is quite a good dashboard. So Jose's just been into the feature traceability, but what I'm going to go into is the requirements traceability.
Excuse. So this test manager, is it the default functionality available within the Cloud ALM?
What's that, sorry?
The test, the functionality testing, is it available within the Cloud ALM?
It's all within Cloud ALM, yeah.
Not the Tricentis?
No, that's test automation. So we're not going to show test automation today.
Okay.
That's not part of the demo, but I will reference where test automation kind of fits into the process. And I'm more than happy to have a conversation after this on test automation.
Yeah.
So here we've got requirements traceability. So taking it back again to, I suppose, that basic question, why would we use Cloud ALM for testing? There's a lot of other test management providers out there. But again, you get that full traceability. So we've created our feature. We can see here we've got a feature and a user story. So from a test manager perspective, if you want to know what's being tested on, what's not being tested on, this dashboard's a really easy way to see that. So you've got features, you've got requirements, you can see what status they're in, and you can see that no testing is currently being performed in them in an official capacity. Okay, so again, from a test manager perspective, this is a good dashboard to come in and see actually what's going on and what's being tested. Another good dashboard, again, before I actually jump into the test case. So again, Jose and Gary have shown this a few times today, but again, you can make it a little bit more specific. So you've got project overview, you've got change manager, but you can also create a testing one. So you can just have the specific cards that are relevant for testing. Now, because this is on Gary's laptop, I've not got that, but I'll just scroll down to some of the relevant. Let's get some good data, and that's implementation. So if we scroll down here, we can get an overview. So we've got 2 test cases in preparation, okay? And then we've got test execution breakdown. So it's a clear, easy dashboard. So you can just have a full transparent view of what's going on. We've got a few test cases in initial, got one in failed and one in passed. We've got a designated card for those failed test cases. And then if we look down here, we've also got defects as well, which we'll come on to shortly. So those are for any test runs that have failed. Obviously, a defect needs to be created to correct whatever's broken in those test cases. So again, from a top-down perspective, quite good visibility. So what we'll do now is, picking up from where Jose left off, we'll jump into our test case and we'll go ahead and create it. So we'll just use the navigation on the left here. We go into test preparation. So we'll just go ahead and set it to this one. Okay, and we go to create. And then, so as we just mentioned, so there's 2 different types of test cases we can create here. We can create a manual test case, which is what we're going to show today. And we've also got an automated test case. And that is directly linked to Tricentis test automation, as Ben spoke about. Again, we're not going to demo that today. But essentially, if you were to create an automated test case, you could basically launch that test automation directly from Cloud ALM. It doesn't launch Tricentis test automation, which is what does all the actual testing. But all that data and the execution status is all still in Cloud ALM. So it works quite nicely. And again, I'm happy to talk about that after the session today. So I'm going to leave the title empty for now. If we go to scope, okay, so we should see the process which Gary created earlier, and then we should see a standard and a custom process diagram. As you can see there, so we'll go ahead and select custom one, and then we'll go ahead and select title. In the interest of time, I did just create one just before. So this is one I just created earlier. Obviously, you just click create and it'll launch with this, but just in the interest of time. So we're going to dig into this test preparation. I'm going to show you some of the things you can change in scope. Okay, so starting off, it's in prepared status. So this essentially doesn't put it into any of the test execution list yet. So it's currently still being worked on. We're actually still scoping what needs to be tested. So all this information is pulled in, the solution process, the process flow. Okay. And then if we go to structure, so this is essentially all the process steps that was in Gary's process flow. But obviously not all of them are going to be relevant that need to be tested on. So this is where you need that communication between what we're actually changing, what step in the process has been changed. Obviously, if you did want to run a regression end-to-end test, you could scope every single activity, put that in a test case and run the entire process. For today's example though, we're just going to select a few, just to make it a little bit more easy to scroll through. So go ahead and scope those. We're going to select the top 2 activities, and then we're also going to select number 15 as well, which is, I think, specifically the one that Gary changed a little bit earlier. Okay, so content. So again, as Gary spoke about earlier, in Cloud ALM, we're provided with something called accelerators. So this is essentially pre-built test scripts that you can put into your test cases. So without these, essentially now you'd have a blank canvas. You might have test cases in Excel, which you copy and paste the information in. but essentially you delivered standard SAP test scripts along with this functionality. So again, in terms of the benefit of using this is one of the biggest that I've seen on the system. You don't have to go through and put each test step in. You don't need to maintain all individual test data. All of it is delivered by standard, and you can just go in and adjust that obviously to your specific needs, any changes that you want to perform. So if you just scroll down, you've got system access, roles that are required to perform this testing, master data, etc. And again, this might all be relevant for you, but as a starting point, it's much easier to remove this information than to start adding this in by kind of default. So again, if we didn't use that accelerator, and again, I'm not, in terms of actually uploading the accelerator, you can do that by Repeat. You basically just upload it, download it and upload it. It's quite a simple process. But without that would essentially be a blank canvas. So SAP thankfully provided a solution for that. So we've got our test case, and then again, linking it back to that traceability, we'd also put our requirements and user story in, so that when we go back to the requirements traceability dashboard, which I showed a little bit earlier, we'd get that transparent view of requirements, feature, test case, and test execution. Okay, so we're going to go ahead, and again, we've got some general information, but again, it's not too complex. This is just a test case. We're not linking multiple test cases together here. We're just testing multiple steps in one process. So to set that to, prepared, so that's now ready to go. Actually, yeah, it's in prepared, waiting to go, prepared's already been gone to the tester. So that's set to prepared, and then obviously the tester would then pick this up and perform that testing. Before we actually perform that testing, I just want to quickly talk about test plans. So anyone who's used Solution Manager will be familiar with test plans. Okay, so test plans are essentially a way of testing multiple test cases within the same testing scenario. So this would be good for end-to-end testing, regression testing in the project. So if you did have multiple test cases, you would essentially put those into a test plan. So you could define test case 1 is tested by myself, test case 2 tested by Gary. And again, from a test manager perspective, they've got status of that specific test plan. So this isn't mandatory. This is just available if you do want this level of testing in your SAP system. So you don't have to use it, but it's there and it's good for, again, that advanced level of testing you want to perform. So you get a breakdown there of the actual test cases. We've got 2 test cases that are in prepared, so they're ready to be tested. And then you get a breakdown of what's actually going on with them. So we've got one executed that's failed, and we've got one that's passed. So if we dig into that, you can see it's these 2 test cases. Scroll down, and then you can dig into those individually as well. Okay, so you can add some start and end dates. So you've just got a little bit more control about what's being tested. Okay, so again, jumping into the test execution now. Okay, so we're now testers. We've been informed that some testing that needs to be performed. Okay, so again, this is kind of work listed, work off as well. It's an easy UI to kind of get your head around. It's quite user friendly. If I just go to the project we've been working on today, we can see that the test case in this case is waiting to be tested on. So we're going to go and jump into that. There we go. So we now have got all this information again. So from a tester perspective, they can now see what needs to be tested and where. So we've got some standard statuses, pass with conditions, fail, etc. So we're going to go ahead and fail that. Okay, so we'd obviously enter some relevant information, but then subsequently we now need to create a defect for this as well. So again, trying to link that back to Solution Manager at this point. There is a few differences to how defects work compared to Solution Manager. The actual transport, so again, if this was an area that required a transport, you would have to create a transport against the feature. The transport isn't linked to the defect, so it's a slight difference there. If you are used to using defects in Solution Manager, there is no transport capability at the moment in the defect directly. But that's not to be said, you still create the defect, you can still link it to the feature and see that link between them, but the actual transport is managed in the feature. So we're going to go ahead and create the defect. So we're going to click save first. Good. And go ahead and create a defect. So again, all that information from the test case is automatically pulled into the defect. So we've got our test case, and then we can obviously enter some more specific individual information for that developer to fix whatever the issue was. So we've got a test case, we've got create subtasks here, so again, there's multiple steps that need to be involved to fix. And if we scroll to the bottom, again, we've got a link exactly to that solution process that we've been working on as well. Okay, so we've got statuses, priority, etc. All the things that you expect to be on a defect screen. So again, I'm not going to go through them all today, but as you can see there, it's all standard fields. So we'll go ahead and set that to in progress and click save. And then we'll go ahead and close that as well. So again, we're assuming now that the developers perform the fix and the tester is now ready to repeat the test that initially failed. So we go back to the test execution. Obviously, we've got a big fail mark here that'll be reported through the traceability and through the dashboards. So we come back in and we set that to pass. So we'll go ahead and save that. Okay, so that's visually represented there. And if we scroll down, obviously there's multiple steps in this test case. So that's just step one. For example, if you have multiple test steps, test sequencing, you can kind of signify that in the test case. So again, so another tester will pick this step up, etc., etc. You can see how that works from a process perspective. So that is really a whistle-stop tour of the testing functionality. But what I wanted to stress is that it's not overly complex to get going, to set up. You know, obviously you create a test case, you sign it to a tester, they perform the testing. If you need a defect, you create it. And then subsequently, you've got that additional functionality there with the test plans if you do want a more granular control of your testing. So we've got 2 minutes spare before I'll hand back to Jose. Is there any questions specifically on test management?
On the dashboard,
yeah.
Is there specific licenses that you need? Can you just view the dashboard?
Yeah. So you still need Cloud ALM log on.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no additional license needed or anything like that to view the dashboards. And essentially, again, I'm not sure if the guys have shown it, but you can just restrict this down to certain cards as well. So if you were only interested in, I think we've got a change manager on here, but if you was only interested in certain cards, you don't have to see them all, you can just see 3 or 4 that are specific for you in your role.
Just a quick one, Jack. From an auditing perspective, how can we get information out of there for auditors in terms of proof that we've tested, like user acceptance testing, they've gone through that process and they've signed it off as it's good to production. What have we got for that?
So you can export the test cases and the test executions.
Just summarise it?
Essentially into a spreadsheet, There's a few, again, I'm not sure we've actually done it on this system yet, so I don't want to jump in it.
I'm going to show the option that you can use documentation side. It's a live version in comparison to SAP Solution Manager, so at least you have a link to or a repository. It could be Microsoft SharePoint or Jira Confluence, so you can see assign those documents to specific user stories or the requirement, so that helps you to keep that track. Okay.
Jack?
Yeah.
When you had a defect, you went off elsewhere, you found the feature associated with it, and that transport then moved across the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
What is the trigger to then highlight that you can go and retest your test case?
So once the defect has been closed, so once the correction transport has been moved through to presumably the QA system, the developer will then test that in the QA system, report that on defect, and then report back to the tester to conclude their testing.
Report back, or what's the trigger?
The mechanism, I believe, again, Jose, you might have to correct me from a transport perspective, I believe it's a manual communication.
This is offline communication, so making sure that, the transport has reached the QA system, please tester, go and check again, making sure that everything is fine before we close the defect.
But the status is also kind of signified that as well. So if the defect's closed, the tester can then go, well, this issue has been resolved, and check the comments as well.
Can you customise the statuses of the defect?
Not by standard in Cloud ALM. There is
a functionality that SAP is working on to add workflow management, so you can customize the status workflow of transactions.
Mm.
But
so you can have a sort of release to QA, release to team, sales.
Okay, any more? I'll hand back to Jose and pick up the feature, move it through to production, and kind of close out the project. Thank you, Jack.
Okay, so yeah, using the analytics, what Jack has covered so far is just basically the fact that we got the, let me just go back to the project review. So he has covered the whole testing case. And just to mention about the documentation side, well, by going back to my feature, apologies, changing between different screens. So I'm gonna ensure that I'm selecting the feature that I've been working on. Before setting this feature to confirm successfully tested, I can just basically, as a chain manager, I want to see test evidence where this has been completed. I know that the test script has been created, but can you show me, like, is there any repository where we can see that this is actually working? So you can use the user story, for instance, and I already create a document where I can assign the test evidence. So I'm going to assign it here. So if I click on save and close, we can see the link here. And this test evidence is basically a document where you can get information about, there's a small status roadshot here. So I can say, okay, this is currently in review. I'm making sure that everything's looking okay. And this is going to be pointing to a URL. In this case, is my SharePoint link for the whole project. So if I click here, technical issues with my password, but yeah, let me see if I can do it with Gavin's side implementation. So I go to feature. Probably just didn't want to jump into all these screens, but yeah, just jumping back into the document. So just pretty sure Gary is assigned to this particular URL. Yeah, this is working. So yeah, this is access to my repository. As a chain manager, I validate that the evidence is there. Everything that I was expecting as a chain manager is looking good before I can say, you know what, I'm happy with all the testing that has been completed in this ticket. And after that, I can just set the status of this particular document to release. And now I can go back to the feature, and the feature, I'm gonna set the status to successfully tested. Perfect. Another area that you have to consider is for the requirement as well. This is where you are involved in the business. Jack obviously showed you how the test phase is covered. But again, if you're doing scripts for the functional consultant to validate that the QA system is basically stable, everything's looking fine, the requirement that we've been working on is basically accepted. The business should be involved and doing that validation as well. So at that point, if the user acceptance testing is completed in SAP Cloud ALM, you can come back to the requirement and say, you know what, from the business side, we are happy with all the testing that we have done. So you can see that right now we are keeping a track, not only from the business side, but from the functional consultancy side. So both areas are being covered during the testing. And now, before officially moving to the deploy phase, something that I want to show you is about the use of quality gates. This is quite useful for project manager because it provides you with a checklist. This is also something that you customize, making sure that you ask the questions before moving or transitioning between those phases during this implementation. In this case, for the deployment phase, and checking that have a cutover plan, does that exist? So I can just change the status. This is basically looking good for me. I can provide an answer. have all the testing been completed? I'm gonna say yes, everything is looking good. I'm gonna set this to test. Any integration that I got for this particular implementation has been included. I'm gonna say yes, everything is good. And I can save these particular changes. And on top of that, you also can assign additional documentation. In this case, I got a particular document that is pointing to my cutover plan. I already reviewed it. As a project manager, I can say that, okay, we are ready to move to the next phase. So what I do here is just basically say, okay, this quality check is done. So we are ready to move officially to the deploy phase. So what's going to happen? The change manager, just going back to the feature, I'm going to just check that I got this particular feature. I'm going to set this to approve to production. So as soon as you have the role as a change manager, it's the only person that can set this status. And when this is done, it will be the case that the transport can be now imported. So at this point, I go back to the feature overview. You can search by releases. Obviously, we have only one single feature, but the intention is that right now you are going to focus on the release side. You're going to have, for instance, 20 features, 100 features. I've seen that kind of number with project implementation. So we ensure that the whole, all the features are selected, and then I can click on deploy to production. And what this is going to do is that from the release management side, it's going to show that all these transports are going to be pushed to the production system. Obviously, in a coherent way, the system is going to understand which transport I'm going to be imported first. But yeah, when this is done, it will be up for the functional consultant to ensure that the productive system is working as expected. While we're waiting for this particular job to be completed, an additional functionality that I want to show you is the cross-project analysis. And this is also quite good for project managers, because you can just check about the status of all the implementations that you're working on with SAP Cloud ALM. It's not only the S4 implementation, you can have an S4 a SuccessFactors, Ariba, Concur. So you can have a validation of all these particular projects directly from this dashboard. You can check the solution processes, you can check the user stories, the roadmap task and the project task. They are more related to project management side. But you can see here all the information that is currently available here. And this is quite good in my opinion, because again, all this is available to you automatically. You don't have to do any additional configuration. And on top of that, you can just use the timelines. You can do a comparison between multiple projects just to check that all these particular projects deadline. I want to see where we are with all this progress. So yeah, the project manager, I think that this is a good functionality to use. And now, let me just quickly check about the status of the feature. So jump here. And now we can see that the transport has been now deployed to my production system. And again, as I mentioned previously, the functional consultant validates the status in production. Everything is looking good. So as a consultant, I say, you know what, this is now deploying production. I'm happy with this particular area that I've been working on. So yeah, that has been updated. And the next activity for me is just to jump into the user story. And I'm gonna set also the status to done. Now will be the case for the business, doing the validation after the go live, making sure that everything is working fine. So the business can go back to the requirements. And at this point, they can set the status to confirmed. They validate everything in production is working as expected. So we are basically making sure that we're progressing the whole activities to the final status. And the final activity will be for the solution process that has been created during the design phase as well. This is also going to be covered by setting the status to production. So yeah, with this, obviously we have show you the whole transition for a project implementation from the design phase, the build phase, testing phase, and the deploy phase. So if I go back to the project overview, and I'll show you specifically about that particular scope that we're working on. Yeah, here we can see that we got plenty of green lights about all the transactions that have been part of this implementation. So this is what you want to see as the project manager. Everything is looking good. Production is now available. So it's up for working on the system. It's going to be available for the business. Good. So I think that with this, we conclude the live session.